Lyme's disease right now is spreading all over the country. It was usually just in the Northeast, finally got down to New Jersey, but it's gotten out in the western part of the country too. My experience with Lyme's is once a horse gets it, it can reoccur. And even though you've treated it, it can reoccur.
It's not gone.
In people, it's a big problem with reoccurrence. Lyme's in horses, I have to read my little list here. It can cause a lot of problems. Laminitis, uveitis, probably the two most swollen and painful joints. Although most of the horses I see today, I have years ago when I first saw it, about 25, 30 years ago, we used to get a lot of big swollen joints. We don't see that anymore. I don't know why. It becomes a kind of subtle problem. Muscle tendency. Some of these horses with Lyme's, if you palpate the muscles, they want to kill you. And yet these horses, if they're a grade 1 lame, it's a lot. Most of them, would you have to say they're not lame?
I have one that's had 3 bad bouts of Lyme.
Yeah.
His ankles are so hot you can't touch him, and he's down as can be. And they don't swell at all. You touch them and they're frying.
Lyme's, early in the disease, can cause a low-grade temperature, but most people don't recognize it. Or you go and examine the horse and you don't find anything else, so you treat him with some butazol and drop the temperature. And then later on, you start developing problems with lameness, tiredness. A lot of these horses with Lyme's, one of the things that people have reported to me, all of a sudden, this horse doesn't have any energy. And people are the same way. My wife has had it. I've known probably 30 people that have had Lyme's disease, and the same thing. What I've found with treatment now, the doxycycline or cycling drugs, but now I've switched to using a drug called Exceed. It's a long-acting cephalosporin. You give them one injection, and 4 to 5 days later you give them a second injection, and 4 or 5 days later you give them a third. What?
I am.
And you have to give it a couple spots because it's well, depending on the weight of the horse, up to 15 to 20 ml of the stuff.
Whoa.
You have to use a 16 gauge needle. If you try to put it through an 18 or 19 gauge needle, you'll be here until the cows come
You
home.
need a jackhammer.
Also, I've found I've been vaccinating horses with dog vaccine since 1999. I had a farm. If you walk out at towards sundown or early in the morning, I've seen as many as 18 to 20 deer in their pasture. And I was constantly fighting Lyme's disease there. And I started vaccinating them with Mariel's dog Lyme vaccine. And they use the monkeypox as a conjunctive and that's what they propagate the limes on. And I've had no problem. People say, initially said it caused kidney problems. We followed about 10 horses at this farm post-vaccination for about 2 years and found no kidney problems. And I've been vaccinating, and, and I have not treated a Lyme's case on this farm since 2000, 19 years. I think even though you treat it, once you finish the treatment, probably 6 weeks to a couple months, you got to vaccinate them for Lyme's. What I've found with the vaccine using the dog, you have to vaccinate them twice a year. Initially, you give them 2 doses a month apart, and then approximately every 6 months, if you're in an area that you have a lot of problems. And at this one farm, I've never had another case. And they've got probably about 30, 35 horses there most of the time. And a lot of it's, the horses are in run-in sheds, so they're exposed to ticks and
all the time.
24 hours a day. The other thing I've found at our farm, we've got a lot of wild turkeys. The last 3 years, we haven't taken a tick off a horse. These turkeys
Turkeys are doing it.
Wow.
Now, people like guinea hens, but guinea hens are so stupid. Turkeys are not stupid. And
Guinea hens are stupid.
all my years
That's an understatement.
traveling the roads, I've only seen one dead turkey hit by a car.
And the guinea hens are always
Well,
getting hit.
And I think places that have a lot of turkeys around, you won't have any ticks around. And we've got one dog
Nice and hard.
now, just one, and we haven't taken a tick off of her. As far as diagnosing Lyme's, it could be so subtle. Now, I send all my blood to Cornell because they do 3 antigens, and they can differentiate if this horse has been vaccinated or if it's possibly got an early Lyme's disease or chronic. And I think it helps you in the treatment. My normal protocol for the last 3 years, I treat them 3 doses of the injectable cephalosporin. After the 3rd injection, I wait a week and we start them on one 30-day treatment of doxycycline. I've not followed enough of these horses up to really tell you how good it works. But the thing I like about the cephalosporin, you don't have to worry about getting a dose into this horse twice a day. You give them one injection, and then 4 to 5 days later, you give them a second, and 4 or 5 days later, you give them a third. And you don't have to worry about daily dosing. Did they eat it? Did you get it into them? They got it into them. And I think it's going to be really probably a better protocol. One of the meetings I went to, and there was talk on infectious diseases, and I don't know where he was at the time, but they tried. It was just a year or so after the seed come out, and they tried it, and they proved they could prove it would work. And now in people, I hear that they're using the cephalosporin to treat people with Lyme's. I Googled it and looked up online to see what I could find. And Lyme's can be so subtle. Any horse, if you get her horses adjusted and when this horse continually goes out of adjustment, whether it's back, hips, knees, shoulders, and yet the horse is not that lame, better check him for Lyme's, because he's probably positive for Lyme's. And I've had a bunch of these over the years, and other people that do adjustment ask me about it, and I keep telling them, check them for Lyme's.
Yeah.
And a lot of these horses will turn up positive, and it's so subtle, showing nothing else, but it's affecting enough of the tendons and ligaments that, particularly in the back, but other joints too. But in the back, you've got all these ligaments and tendons that hold the vertebrae together, plus the muscles. And it's real easy for those to get out of whack and get out of adjustment. If anybody got any questions or comments about Lyme's,
Now, when you say that they're already showing symptoms, is it too late at that point to give them the vaccine?
yes.
You have to do it before.
Most of the time, I recommend, unless it's a horse that I know about, to check them for Lyme's before you vaccinate them. I don't know what happens in a horse if you have an active case of Lyme
And you're not
and
gonna
you vaccinate them. I don't know what kind of reaction you might get. Probably minimal, but I haven't tried it.
I don't
that
know.
I
So
know of.
Susie, what was Star's symptoms after being at the New Jersey ride where she
If you,
tested
no
positive?
question about Lyme.
Tested.
You just had her tested.
One thing that you always want to remember, and some of these horses that you think might have Lyme's, but you can't prove it, check them for ehrlichiosis.
So,
For
what?
Do you run
Ehrlichiosis is
them?
another
If they're all the
tick-borne
tick-borne
disease.
diseases,
What?
there's like 10 different tick-borne diseases.
At least,
Peter
yeah.
went to a human specialist, infectious disease specialist 2 years ago, and she ran his blood for 10 different Lyme. Lyme's is just one, and
Yeah.
it's like, and so can they run and differentiate? Like, can you run a panel or
Nobody has a panel.
no?
I don't know if even in humans there's a panel according.
She drew like 4 things of blood and sent it
Yeah.
off to Cornell, or
Yeah.
it was Cornell. That's who she sent hers to.
Cornell's the place to go with it.
Yeah.
But normally with ehrlichiosis, even though you can get the same subtle changes that you get with ehrlichiosis, so usually the horse for a few days will run a high temperature. And sometimes that's a giveaway. If I get a horse that looks like it's Lyme's, I'll check them for Lyme's and ehrlichiosis both.
What about anaplasmosis?
There is,
That's another one that's
that
going
is,
That's another devil.
My dog-
that's another level.
Yeah, my
It-
dog.
It's been, anaplasmosis is found in horses. It's one of the differentials between Lyme's. You can test them for anaplasmosis. But a lot of anaplasmosis show up with kind of the same symptom you get with EPM.
Yeah.
So that's another egg in the pot, so to speak.
Another way
Katrina.
If not, I'll move on to EPM.
Can I ask one question?
Eh?
So once they test positive for Lyme's, even like with humans,
Yeah.
and you test again after you've treated them,
Yeah.
don't they always have?
You gotta, after you treat them, you gotta wait probably a minimum of 4 months.
Yeah.
Because they'll tear tighter for a long time.
Okay.
And even people. EPM, I think, is probably undiagnosed in a lot of cases. Prime thing I'm going to tell you about 5 years ago, a client of mine called. She said, I've got a friend that trains thoroughbreds. She's got this 3-year-old thoroughbred gilding, pardon me. And she spent over $5,000 and they never could diagnose the lameness. I said, well, I'll take a look at it. And I went up to the stable that she had it at. I watched the horse walk out of the stall. And they had an area in the barn that was probably about 50 feet square. It was dirt floor where you could exercise a horse in there. Put him on the lunge line in there, and then I watched him go both ways, and then I had her turn the horse in a real short circle. This horse could not handle his hind feet. He didn't know where the hell he was putting them. I did a tail pull on him, and I almost put him on the ground. Now he'd been at one of the higher learning institutions, and I asked the woman, has anybody ever done a simple neurologic test? She said no. We treated for EPM. I use treatment that's devised by a woman down in Florida. And we put them on 2 rounds of treatment. And this was in end of January or end of March or early April. She put them back in training in September. And a client of mine kept in touch with her, and he was doing good. He'd never gotten her to the point that she even think about racing him. I think it was Monmouth, still was racing in December. He took him up to Monmouth and ran 1 race, came in second. And the following spring, he won 2 races. But here again, I think it's something you've got to look at. I've had a couple high-end hunter-jumper trainers tell me if they've got a horse that they want a pre-purchase exam on, they pull Lyme's and EPM on them right away, because so many of these are so subtle and they don't show up. The EPM, the first case I saw of EPM was back in the late 60s, early 70s. It was diagnosed, but they didn't know for sure what it was. Now we know it was EPM, because the horse was insured and went down to New Bolton Center, and they found lesions in it. And it was before really we knew a lot about
So you knew what it was.
EPM. Now the vaccine that Fort Dodge put out back in the 90s and still available in about 2002, 2003, they could not prove to the satisfaction of the Food and Drug Administration that the vaccine worked. But empirically, it did work. A lot of the testing they were doing was in Ohio, and veterinary school at Ohio State, and there was a big standardbred farm in Ohio that had about 250 broodmares there a year, plus yearlings and probably some 2-year-olds. And this farm was treating about 15 to 20% of these horses every year for EPM. Once they started vaccinating them, they didn't have another case. Now,
So you can actually
they
vaccinate.
didn't kill off all the animals around there, but the vaccine, they could prove it worked there. But the federal government, because what happens is some horses will, if you mix a bunch of horses, you have control horses and horses vaccinated in a group. And then you go and challenge them with the organism. The problem was before they even, the horses that were running in there with this group that had been vaccinated, some of the horses that were controlled were seroconverted. They could not prove why this was happening. And we don't think that the vaccine actually gave them any of the symptoms of EPM. Yeah, they'll test positive for EPM, but the best they did, and they tried this 4 different times, and they even went into Canada and tried it. Fort Dodge was footing the bill, and they never could prove it, and so they had to pull the vaccine off the market. Dr. Ellison down in Florida, she is trying to convince somebody to start the vaccine again. I send all my blood to her down there, and one thing we've learned over the years that EPM not only can affect the spinal cord, but it also can affect peripheral nerves. And this woman down in Florida has actually proved that. And she's working with a drug now. It's an old protozoan drug that's been on the market for years, and she combines this with lobamisol. The lobamisol is a wormer that's been used for years in sheep and goats. And what happens when you give horses lobamisol, it stimulates their immune system tremendously for some reason. And years ago, if you look back in the literature, probably 35, 40 years ago, maybe longer than that, before we had vaccines for influenza in horses, people that had experimented giving horses lobamisol just to kick their immune system, so if they did get influenza, they kicked it out real quickly. And her treatment is, and we treat them for 10 days, and then we come back 4 weeks later and do another blood test to see what, and we also run a CPA, which is a marker for protozoa. You probably heard of serum amylase A in horses. Well, this works somewhat the same way. but mainly for protozoa type. And this woman has done quite a bit of work. Right now she's trying to get this combination approved by the Food and Drug Administration. She's got a lot of horses that she's using. And I've had better success with this than I've had with Marquis and a couple of the others. The original treatment for EPM was high doses of sulfa drugs, and that was the original treatment, and it didn't work very well at all. Also, I've learned, when I'm not too happy with my results, I found out you gotta, when you treat these horses, and I'm using it for both Lyme's and EPM, vitamin E, but don't go to the feed store and get vitamin E, because most of the vitamin E that's sold is not absorbed enough for the horse. There's only 2 companies, and Sarah Ralston proved that up at Rutgers a few years ago. One of them is over the, what's his name, over in Pennsylvania, and I can't remember the other one. That's the one I use. I carry a bunch of printouts, and when I treat a horse for Lyme's or EPM, I hand it and I said, get this EPM, this vitamin E.
Is it all natural one, Doc?
Huh?
All natural vitamin E? And is it, what form is it? Is it liquid?
What?
Is it liquid, powder, pellet?
It's tablets,
Okay,
I believe, or powder. I can't remember. It's powder.
powder.
And I've had a lot better results boosting them with vitamin E. And if you look at some of the research work that's been done in humans, people have been undergoing chemotherapy for numerous types of tumors. Some of the studies now prove 2 things. You put them on high levels of vitamin C and vitamin E. And some of the results have been really amazing.
I take it.
Going back to vitamin C, in people, they have run experiments, and one of them was done at Jefferson. I read it. And they were using intravenous vitamin E, or vitamin C, to treat a couple different, one was lung cancer. And it was amazing. What happens is it blocks the ability for whatever the cause of the tumor, so that it forces the immune system in the body to recognize it as a foreign,
It's alien.
and probably there's going to be a much more work on it. The big problem with vitamin C, if you orally take it, it degrades real rapidly. And probably in horses, vitamin C would be a good adjunct to treating for things like Lyme's. But any questions about EPM? Has anybody here had a case of EPM?
I have one at home right now.
What?
I have one at home right now.
Yeah, but it can be real subtle too. They lose muscle and weight in young horses. And right now I'm treating a standard bred. He'll be 3 in January. Well, I don't know anybody, but anyway, the big complaint was that with this, he had no muscle behind. Checked him for Lyme's, he was negative. Checked him for EPM. This was in June, and treated him for EPM. I mean, his rear end looked like somebody had caved everything out, both sides. And he was a very picky eater. He would eat, and once we treated him twice, right now, I saw him about a week ago, and if you'd think he's a normal horse. He's gained all that muscle back and the weight, and he's eating good. And I've had 2 or 3 young horses that the same thing has happened.
And what was the medication for reversal of that?
It's a combination of an old anaprotozoan and levamisole. She packages up. There is 2 tablets of in blister packs, and 1 of the protozoa and anaprotozoa, and 1 tablet of levamisole. You give them once a day for 10 days, and in my experience, it's beaten everything I've ever done with Marquis, and well, the other 2 are off the market now. And Marquis, you can't even get Marquis right now. I don't know why, but ever since we've had our Obamacare, I've complained. Routine drugs can be on back order real quickly. Right now, ophthalmic is in the same position. If you, even common ophthalmic ointments, it's hard to get a hold of. And I've had times where you could not get any tetracycline. And I think I've been knocking around this, 56 years. And never have I had times where I could not get drugs. And I don't know what the whole stuff that I've read, nobody seems to know what the problem is. I think some of it is the drug companies. If it's a drug they can't make a lot of money on, they aren't gonna.
They just let it go by.
Yeah.